Hi, this is Meredith Lego. Welcome to my channel on Ascension Science and the Expansion of Consciousness. Earlier this week, I participated in a podcast with Jeff Mara. For those of you who have been listening or tuning into my channel for a while, I just wanted to let you know that that video is out there, and I'll post a comment to it in the notes section. And a lot of it covers much of the material that I've channeled from Ascended Master Hilarion, which is much earlier in what you would find on my YouTube channel. For those who are new to the channel and have found the site because of that interview, I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for tuning in. A lot of the content that I do cover touches upon topics around the mechanics of ascension, the mechanics of sort of this reality that we live in, as well as basically how to think about living the best life possible. And I've been able to provide this material by tuning into non-localized consciousness, or basically extra-dimensional or interdimensional beings, and basically sharing information that I have received from them. In this particular video, I'm going to touch upon a series of, I'm going to touch upon a topic that has to do with questions I received from many different viewers of that podcast. And they followed up to me within the last week. And basically, there was a theme to some of the questions. So I'm going to try and tackle a few of those themes over the next several videos. The first one has to do with food. So in that particular interview, I shared my experience of how I changed my eating lifestyle relatively early on in my journey. And several individuals basically asked me about that, and are probably trying to correlate it to decisions that they're making around their own eating habits right now as well. So I would share, I wanted to share with you why I made the decision to start eating more a vegetarian diet, and ultimately share with you other learnings that I've received along the way. So that's what this video is all about, the frequency of food. So I'm going to kind of go to some notes on this. So first of all, I talked about basically wanting to have a higher vibrational frequency. And that's basically what led me at that point in my life to make the decision to eat more of a plant-based diet. I also cut out alcohol, and I stopped caffeine. One of the things that I didn't stop quite as drastically was sugar. That's a tougher one to cut for me, but I have found that when I stop eating sugar and when I stop eating processed foods, it has a material impact on the quality of my ability to connect into higher forms of consciousness. So when you think about frequency, first of all, frequency is nothing more than the rate at which vibration occurs that constitutes a wave. Either, it can be material such as a sound wave, or in an electromagnetic field, such as radio waves or lights, and it's measured per second. So in other words, you might have a wave, and it could take a second for that wave to kind of go from high to low. But essentially, high frequency is going to have a lot of waves in between 2 points of time, and low frequency will have a lower wave between 2 points of time. And I think I've done several videos in the past on the concept of frequency and oscillation. So I'll try and include links to those. So we know that we have the ability of measuring frequency of, let's say, electrical charge. But when it comes to food, how does the frequency actually get measured? There's a couple different types of electrical equipment that can measure the frequency of food. You can use a frequency meter or a digital multimeter, and usually they tend to measure the frequency in hertz. So again, that's kind of measuring the wavelength of, let's say, an electrical current over a second of time, basically. And a frequency meter displays the frequency of a periodic electrical signal. So this would be an electrical signal that would be coming through in the food form, probably over the course of a second. And it was something that was developed in the 1970s. But also, you can also use a biophotonic light. You can measure biophotonic light as well, and there's different instruments that can do that, and that's another way to measure frequency. So anything, when you kind of think about food, most food that we eat is not alive in the sense that it's meat or it's some vegetable that's been pulled up from the ground. You would think it's kind of not connected to living source, but even everything has an electromagnetic frequency. Even rocks do. So it doesn't matter if it's sort of living or dead, it's going to have an electromagnetic frequency. And these instruments have the ability of basically tuning into that frequency and measuring it. And the frequency, can differ depending upon also the life force that's in the matter. So what they've found are individuals who have done this measurement and shared the findings on it over time is that raw foods and fresh vegetables and fruits have a higher frequency, an electric frequency than dead foods. So dead foods would be things like meat, as well as highly processed foods. So the highest frequency foods have chemical sunlight due to photosynthesis, and these would be food sources, though I probably wouldn't eat them, like phytoplankton, chloroplast, direct chloroplast, but also wheatgrass. So wheatgrass is going to have, apparently has been found to have very high frequency, in its electromagnetic frequency structure. Other foods that become more palatable, let's say, would be things like lemons, which I tend to put in my water all the time, spirulina, raw cacao, which sometimes I will have, in yogurt in place of granola. And then you kind of start moving down the spectrum into more edible type foods like berries, fruit. When you get into really, really deep leafy greens like spinach and kale, it's going to have a higher concentration of chloroplast, which basically means that it's collecting, it's closest to collecting the source of the sun. So another great concept to think about higher frequency food is that, is it within the first order of chain of collecting energy from the sun, or is it in the second order of chain or the third order of chain in collecting energy from the sun? So if you kind of think about fruits or vegetables, it's getting its energy directly from the sun, which is the energy source for our planet. And then let's say you have an animal. That animal is eating the plant material, and then you're consuming the animal. So that's a secondary source of energy from for a food source. So what I decided was try and as best possible to basically start to consume energy that was going to be closer to the primary source of energy for our planet, which is the sun and which is light. So that's the choice that I made. I would say that a secondary reason for just having higher frequency energy in eating certain foods is that your body has to actually use energy in order to break down food molecules inside the body. And so digesting meat can, because it's protein, just takes the body longer in order to actually digest it. So it's going to stay in your intestinal tract or gastrointestinal tract a little bit longer. I'm not an expert on this, but having read some studies, meat can stay inside of your body upwards of 2 days, and I think red meat stays the longest. It just takes more energy for your body in order to break down the meat, whereas plants, because they're higher in fiber, tend to exit our system faster. So that can take 24 hours or less sometimes. So as a result, you're just using less energy in order to break down and break apart the nutrients within plant type food than you are within meats. Now, a lot of people could ask, well, gee, how do you get your proteins? There's lots of different types of vegetables and fruits that actually have protein in them. So you tend to just focus more on adding those types of foods into your diet. But I would say that irrespective of the type of food that you eat, you always have the ability to direct the frequency of your food simply through your intention. So let me share with you some research that's been done on this particular topic. So the first is research done by Masaru Emoto. At first I had heard he was a doctor, but I don't believe he's a doctor. He just was doing some experiments on this topic, and those experiments have been replicated by other scientists since then and found to be true. So what he basically did is he found through experiments that human consciousness has the ability to influence the molecular structure of water and food. And so the way that he did this, if you have not heard this, I'll kind of share it. But the way he did this is he noticed that did experiments that when water was on the verge of freezing, he would direct positive thoughts to the water in the the vial or whatever it was being stored in while it was freezing, to one group of water tubes, and to the other group of water tubes, he would direct negative thoughts. So for one, let's say he would be saying, "I love you," or peace, or happiness. But mostly he was giving that glass of water on the verge of freezing positive thoughts. And for the other group, it was, "I hate you," or, "You're not worthy," or, "war," or something like that. And that particular water, would receive that day after day after day. And what they noticed is that the water on the verge of freezing, as it was freezing, that had very positive thoughts, was freezing with very, very beautiful crystalline structures, like perfect symmetry, like very snowflake-like. Whereas the water that was receiving negative intentions and thoughts was not crystallizing at all. In fact, it was very mushy. It was very distorted in its structure. So they found that intentions really did have a significant impact on the water structure and therefore the frequency. And they were able to replicate the same sort of outcomes in food. So they would leave food out, let's say, in a normal air temperature environment, and basically, obviously food is going to decay usually over time in an environment, but the food that was receiving positive intention had a slower rate of decay than the other food. So again, those types of experiments have been replicated. So that's definitely one form of, I guess you could say, experimentation that has shown that irrespective of what you're eating, the intentions that you put into what you're eating are equally as important to actually what you're eating itself. The second particular research that I've come across, there's a bit of a correlation to the idea of frequency, but I think it also has to do how much any consciousness. So anything that's energy is conscious, and it has the ability to, because all energy is sort of interconnected in a quantum field, has the ability to pick up and tune into the intentions of other consciousness. So this was first discovered by a gentleman named Cleve Baxter. So Cleve Baxter was a former CIA polygraph expert. Okay, so like when the polygraph was first being invented, I believe that he actually wrote the protocols for the polygraph testing techniques back in the 1960s. But after he left the CIA, he went off and started his own lab. And one night at 2 in the morning or some ridiculous hour, he was kind of bored, and he decided to hook the polygraph up to some plants that his secretary had. Back then, they were called secretaries. So he hooked the polygraph up to some plants that were in the lab, and then he just wanted to see if he would get a reading. There was no reading. Then he decided to do a few experiments. He got the idea of basically thinking the thought of lighting the plant on fire with a Bic lighter, and there still was no reading. But when he actually made the movement to go get a Bic lighter from one of the desks that was in the lab and start walking it over to the plant, the plant, the polygraph that was hooked up to the plant spiked. So it started sensing that there was true intention for it to be harmed, and it actually started to emit some sort of an electromagnetic frequency, or whatever it is that the polygraph is essentially measuring. And he was able to replicate that experiment multiple times with other polygraph experts, over the course of the many months following. One of the interesting things that they did is they actually had multiple plants that were hooked up in one time, and I think in the lab, were cooking some fish or some lobster or something like that. And as the lobster was in the process of, it was a live lobster, unfortunately, but it was going to be boiled in water, all of the plants in the room sensed it, and they were just going off the charts. So my point being is that even if, you think of something as not being alive or not a sentient being, it still has the ability to sort of pick up intention and frequency of thought. So irrespective of what you're eating, that taught me the importance of putting positive intention into anything that I'm eating. So, I didn't necessarily grow up religious, and I never really understood the concept of praying over food because of it. But I think that this really provided me with an appreciation of the scientific reason of why you want to thank your food, why you want to provide gratitude for what you're eating, because, so first of all, it's sharing its energy, with you. It's consciousness. It may not be sentient, but it's consciousness. And in doing so, you have the ability to positively influence the structure of the food. This is important because in the case of Emoto, he was studying how thought and human consciousness could impact the molecular structure of water. And a lot of our food has water, could have water in it, especially fruit, for example. It's going to have a higher concentration of water. Certainly if you're drinking water or any sort of liquid, it's even, beneficial to give loving thoughts or loving intentions or gratitude towards what you're drinking. So since doing that, I've noticed, a remarkable improvement in just feeling very positive about what I'm eating. So that's really why I made the choice to stop eating as much meat. But do I live strictly by that? No. If I sense that my body needs meat, I eat meat. And not not chicken or beef. I eat fish. So that will be what I tend to eat if I feel that it's needed. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I do notice that when I eat sugar and when I eat processed foods, which is very low frequency in the sense that there isn't as much of an electrical charge. But when I do that, I do notice it influences my ability to tune into the unified field. It sort of somewhat diminishes that ability. So, if I'm really interested in tuning in, I have to back off those foods probably a week before to improve connection. But irrespective of what I do, I think the most important thing that I would say to a lot of folks who were asking me questions about what I should be eating, because those were some of the comments that I got, is, it's most important for you to tune into what's right for you. The most important thing is to not give up your power around, what you should be eating. It's do your own research, do what resonates and works for your own body, and trust your own intuition. That's probably the most important thing. This last item that I can suggest could be a useful tool, and it's called the pendulum test. And if you're trying to figure out, is this good for my body? Is this, going to be the right thing for me? Be using what's called a pendulum test. So a pendulum is nothing more than a string, or sometimes it's more of like a metal string that has some object attached to the bottom. It could be a crystal, or it could be, a ball, just something a little, heavy that has weight. And you can use, basically a pendulum will, spin around, but it can move based upon the subtle changes or wiggles within your hand as you're holding it. But you've got a subconscious, and that subconscious has the ability of actually directing how that pendulum can swing. So even if you as your ego personality is trying to hold the pendulum completely still, if you ask yourself a question, your subconscious will intuitively start to guide the pendulum to answer it a certain way. So for example, if you can test this out, where essentially if you say, give me a yes answer, show me how the pendulum would swing if the answer is yes. It will start to swing in a certain way. It could be back and forth or front back or something like that. And then if you say, show me how the pendulum would swing with a no answer, it'll start going a different direction. There's tons of material on YouTube on how to do pendulum tests. The reason that I bring this up is that you can actually ask, is this food good for me? So you could be thinking of an apple or a kale or, a Snickers bar, whatever the case may be. And your subconscious essentially could provide an answer for you. Yes, no, maybe. So that's really coming from within you. So if you're not quite certain, like, I think I should be eating this, but I'm not certain, maybe there are some chemicals in there that are funky. Is this good for me? That could be something worth testing out. And some people who may be like, I think I might be having allergies or a reaction to certain types of food, but they're not 100% certain. This could be a good way to test it out. So if like you're having somewhat of a reaction to dairy, but you've never had it before, but it's just started, that could be a good, potential method to test out. Is this the right type of food for me now in my stage of life, for example? So I just wanted to share that. I've never done that personally. I use my intuition, but I have heard that has been helpful for some individuals if they're looking for something that's helpful as a test, where they don't necessarily have to go to a doctor and, get tested for food allergies and stuff like that. So hopefully this provides some answers to some of the questions that individuals had, and maybe you learned something a little bit about food and about the intentions that you can, give to your food. So with that, I hope you have a really great rest of your evening and weekend, wherever you are. And If you're new to the channel, I would encourage you to subscribe and then, sign up for alerts. Also, I would highly recommend that you actually start reviewing content from the very first videos that I posted. I believe in YouTube there's an ability to sort videos from like first to last or most recent or the original ones. I would go back to the beginning. And the reason that I would is that when I first started channeling an ascended master, he really, was laying out content on the quantum field and how the universe works. He was basically trying, explaining his version of how the universe works. It was pretty eye-opening, but I felt like I was being taught like a science book. So you kind of start with the fundamentals and then you learn that, and then those fundamentals get discussed in later chapters. So, I'm always kind of recommending, hey, if you're going to start at the beginning, because you're going to learn some basic principles that are around the mechanics of the quantum field, and that starts to be built upon in later videos, which would be like chapters in a book. So with that, again, I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and hope to see you in future videos where I can share some insights or content. Thanks. Good night.